The following presentation is brought to you by the Pride of ODU, the official NIL collective of Old Dominion Athletics. Be a monarchist. Join the Pride. Monarchs, to help us get prepped for this weekend's important Sun Belt East battle against JMU, we reached out to our friends at JMU Sound Off to help educate us a bit on the Dukes. And tonight, we are joined by Taylor Adkins, the Duke of Botetourt. He is a co-host of JMU Sound Off, and we're happy to have him. Welcome to the show, Taylor. How is life in Botetourt?
Life in Botetourt is great. I always talk about how, I grew up in Hampton Roads, grew up in Virginia Beach, went to Cox High School. But Southwest Virginia, it's a beautiful part of the state. And we're out here just outside of Roanoke in Botetourt County. So I try to give as much of a spotlight to this part of Virginia, even though I love out east in the Tidewater area as well.
All right, Taylor. So could you fill us in a little bit on your background and connection to JMU
Sure.
Sound Off, and how you guys got started podcasting?
Yeah, so I'm an 07 graduate of JMU. Upon graduation, started my career in college athletics, worked for the Duke Club, but had a lot of great colleagues over at Old Dominion that back in our CAA days. So worked at JMU for 6 years after college, then went down to UTSA when they started their football program. It was the same year that Old Dominion was also transitioning to Conference USA. So when I went to Texas, I didn't lose my ODU connection, and worked at UTSA for 8 years, overseeing their athletic fundraising operations. And then a few years ago, got out of college athletics, moved back to the area where my wife is from, outside of Roanoke, and then worked for the hospital down here running their foundation. So but was born and raised in Virginia Beach. Like I said, went to Cox High School and grew up going to Scope. Odell Hodge was probably on equal ground to Michael Jordan when I was growing up. To me, they were both two of the best basketball players. Went to Paul Webb's basketball camp every year. Wendy Larry went to my church. I mean, I could go down the list. My brother also went to Old Dominion, and when UTSA played in Norfolk for the first time in football, was able to travel with the team, and my brother got engaged at the Fountain on campus. So I have a ton of ODU ties, and ODU played a big part of my just love of college athletics in general growing up.
Well, I'm happy that when we reached out, they sent you to us, because we get someone that understands Old Dominion a little bit.
Sure.
All right. So what was your thought when Odell announced he was coming back to be an assistant coach at ODU?
Well, I think I messaged y'all and I said, let me know when he's going to be on the show. And matter of fact, I believe so. Lou Rowe, who played at JMU at the same time Odell played at Old Dominion, came back and was an assistant coach for us. We actually did grad school together at JMU, and I believe there's some connection between Lou Rowe and Odell. Either someone's a godparent or someone else, or something's going on there. But I'd always tell Lou if he sees Odell I would probably fanboy. I would ask for Odell's autograph today if I saw him, even with all this purple behind me. So I was excited to see him back on the staff, and I'll probably try to wave him down when he comes up to Harrisonburg this year.
Well, I will say you couldn't have picked a nicer former athlete from ODU or athlete from ODU to pick as your favorite, because I wasn't around when he played at ODU. So all I have are highlights and the records to look at. But I've had the pleasure of meeting him and talking to him a lot since he's been back. And I think anyone that meets him instantly thinks they're friends after 5 minutes.
I've never had the chance to meet him. I mean, he was just a larger than life figure to me. Like I said, I'm born in '85, so I'm coming up elementary, middle school in the early mid '90s, right when he's at his peak, and Old Dominion's doing a lot of great things. And we would go to Richmond every year for the CAA tournament. I think from the early '90s until I left for Texas in 2013, I did not miss a CAA basketball tournament. My colors just changed from blue to purple over time. So
I will say, while it's on the topic, I miss those CAA tournament days.
Amen.
They were fun. I mean, the stadium wasn't great, but the atmosphere was awesome.
It was the regionality of college athletics that really what we're missing today. And I remember when UTSA was when we were in Conference USA, I'm thinking, why is Texas El Paso and a school from Norfolk, Virginia in a conference? And I'll even say when I was at UTSA, I think we hosted Arizona State and Texas State hosted uh, Kansas State or someone, and both schools had like half capacity of their stadiums. The next week, UTSA and Texas State, as two of the worst teams in the country that year, played in a sold out stadium. And so, what I'm trying to say to that, the big names just don't matter. I mean, a JMU Old Dominion game is much more appealing to me. I don't know if you've seen the news. Washington State is coming to Harrisonburg next year. And I think that's awesome to have a school of their size and everything come to Harrisonburg. But I don't think that beats out an Old Dominion JMU, an App State JMU, and that's really what I love about the Sun Belt is just the regionality of peer institutions. And with all this conference realignment mess that keeps coming up, I'm kind of fat and happy in the Sun Belt right now.
Yeah, the only thing that's missing for me is a basketball tournament site that
Yes.
is located conveniently for all these fans in the East.
Well, and not only that, I made this comment on the Sun Belt, and I said, look, I've been on the college athletic business side, so I'm sure money and contracts, and there's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm not aware of. But when you look at who have been in recent history the top basketball programs, you're looking at Marshall, you're looking at App, you're looking at Old Dominion, you're looking at JMU. I mean, it's very difficult to get to Pensacola. It's not a large airport. It's not a short drive for anybody. And it stinks when I feel like the Sun Belt really is coming up as a mid-major basketball conference, but you turn on the tournament games in early March and it's just 1,000 people maybe in the arena.
And to add to your point, all of those schools are leading the league in attendance for
That
basketball.
too. Yeah. Yep.
So if you're trying to draw a crowd, you need to be near the teams with crowds.
Well, and I always said about the TED, or I guess now Chartway Arena, that one of the early, matter of fact, I don't know if it was the first game, but it was the first year when Old Dominion hosted St. Joe's at the TED, and there was a comment about like the Old Dominion's basketball arena is the NBA arena without the upper deck. I mean, I think you had a masseuse up on the club floor. You had iPads in your suite walls before iPads were even a thing, and I mean, Old Dominion's arena was not mid-major by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, we've done a pretty good job maintaining it, and we enjoyed our trip up to JMU. I think it was a
Yeah.
season. Beautiful arena you guys have there, though the noise in there sounds a little weird with that steel wall.
Yeah, and depending on where your seats are, the audio it comes and goes. So,
Yeah, it
but yeah,
sounded
I mean,
almost distorted.
yeah, yeah, I've noticed that for my seats a bit. But to have an arena and an atmosphere like that at JMU basketball games, I'm sure or maybe you haven't ever been up to the Convo. It just wasn't a facility that really could electrify an atmosphere. And even when JMU did have some good teams like that team in 2013 that made a run, it was just tough to get people to come out there.
Yeah, it's a very nice arena you guys have built there. But let's talk about football.
Yeah.
So it's year one for Coach Chesney. What are the biggest changes Bob has brought to JMU so far?
I'm trying to describe that without using some very cliche language, but this sense of family and buy-in that I've seen from the players, you can watch the press conference of any pre, post, or midweek press conference from this team, and you're going to see the players all saying the same thing, meaning not only are they listening to the coaches, but I don't know how to explain it. You can tell that they're saying it with conviction and they're not just repeating a line that they don't know what's behind it. Coach Chesney talks about knowing your why. And if you've ever heard an interview with our captain linebacker who transferred in from Holy Cross, Jacob Dobbs, we asked him what's the worst part of a Bob Chesney practice, and he said with just a straight face, he's like, when it ends. He says it's not something that you want to end, that the practices are fun, they're competitive, there's something that you enjoy and look forward to going to, and not just looking forward to the game. So there seems to be a really neat culture there. And I don't want to, compare it necessarily to previous coaching administrations, but from a fan perspective, there's not really a lot to be critical about of the response and the attitude and the character you've seen from the players and coaches, just about them as a unit, which is especially important in this day and age of NIL and transfer portal, where you're putting 40, 50, 60 new kids together every year. It's been impressive how much they've gelled.
I mean, personality wise, you could not have gone any further from the prior coach.
Yes.
Well, speaking of the prior coach, JMU hit the ground running during their transition to FBS. Expectations are always extremely high in Harrisonburg, especially after that dominant run by Signetti.
Yeah.
But what were your expectations coming into this year, and have you had to adjust those at all?
It was so hard to give an honest answer to that because, and again, referring back to the NIL and transfer portal, there wasn't a lot to judge the team that was going to be taking the field. And not only that, even if you could get a good grasp on that, Dave Riggert, who's the voice of the Dukes and does our radio call, he came on our show and talked about what he saw at practice and how, I mean, really high on this team he was. But even if you get a good grasp on the JMU team, you really don't know what the other teams in your conference look like. You can't really say, well, this team did this last year, therefore they're returning 80, 90% of their production. I mean, I forgot the exact percentage, but it was like JMU is returning 6% of its production from last year. So until you take the field, you really don't know what you're getting. And if you look at JMU's schedule throughout the year and the games they've played so far, Charlotte, we won 30-9, but there were some big plays. It wasn't a lot of like consistent drives, some big plays that made that score look a little bigger than it was. The next week, we hold Gardner Webb, who I think is currently 4-6 in the FCS, on a goal line stand to win 13-6. So there's not a lot of high expectations going into UNC. And then it was 53-14 at halftime, 70-50 the final score. I think that was the highest points they've ever had scored on them in Chapel Hill ever, and the most points they'd ever had scored in one half. So now you're thinking, oh, okay, now they're rolling, everything's gelling. Came home, we beat a bad Ball State team, and and you're looking to cruise into Louisiana Monroe, who was picked to be at the bottom of the conference. And that weekend, I was actually at a music festival down in Alabama, so I was like, well, it's a good thing I don't really have to pay attention to this game because it's one of the worst teams on the schedule. And sure enough, you're getting the little updates from the more the text thread was active during that music festival, the more I was like, either we're winning by 60 or things aren't going well. And of course, we lose that game by 2. So now everyone's down after that. And we have a short turnaround against, at the time, a good Coastal team. And we show up on Thursday night and destroy them. And now it's like, okay, so clearly the ULM was the outlier. We still are the same team we are last year. We're going to go 11-1. And then you go down to Georgia Southern, and Georgia Southern, it wasn't even close. I mean, it was 28-14. We had a pick 6 late in the game. But that was a game where, for the first time probably in 10 years, I would say JMU was just, they were out of the game early. So then again, everyone's kind of down after that. And then the last 2 games we've played, the game after that was Southern Miss. I think it was 32-15. Southern Miss is not only the worst team, I think, in the conference, but I would say one of the worst teams in the country. So there's not a lot to grab from that game. But then 2 weeks later, we had a bye, and then last weekend, Georgia State, that was probably the first complete game that I've seen JMU play, and I'm counting even, the Ball State and the UNC games. The offense just executed. It was one of those, when you're trying to look who's the player of the game on offense, there were 4 or 5 guys that were pretty much pushed. So there wasn't that one guy. It wasn't like the Charlotte game where it was a couple of plays. And then defense, we were missing our captain. and we held Georgia State to single digits for the first time that year. I mean, Georgia State doesn't have a great record, but they've put up 20, 30 points a game against some good competition. They beat Vanderbilt, put up 36 against them. So, you feel like the coaches and the team really use that bye week to not only make the adjustments on the playbook, but get some guys healthy. Because I would say, being our third year of FBS, this is the first year where that depth, you go to the second and third line are FBS players, and you're not getting to that second or third level, and it's FCS guys from the previous regime.
All right, so Georgia State game, obviously everything started to click. But what position group are you most confident at this point in the season?
I mean, our D line and linebackers, there really hasn't been a game since early in the season, those first 2 games, where they really haven't dominated up front. Even in the Georgia Southern game, it was probably one of their worst performances, but they still weren't a weak spot. So our defense has been consistent throughout the year. The biggest question marks have been on the offensive side of the ball, and it's less about not having the guys that can do it, but it hasn't been consistent throughout the year.
All right, and what kind of formation are you guys running on defense now?
We're doing that, that 4-2-5, 4-3, really more of that 4-2-5 look, where you kind of have that monster back kind of roaming around. This is where Michael on our show does a much better job of breaking down the position groups and the strategy. And I mean, Michael he looks at the game kind of as a coach does. So, but defensively, we've been able to handle teams that have a lot of play action, been able to handle teams that have done the option. I feel like defensively we've given up fewer big plays than we did last year. I think that was the concern of some of Cignetti's teams, where we were so dominant, but there were some breakdowns at times. Our defense really hasn't had a lot of those big play breakaways. Matter of fact, just because we did the show last night, I think Georgia State only had one play over 20 yards the whole game. So we've been consistent on defense.
Yeah, one thing Gary on our show noted was your turnover margin is obviously very good, plus 18 on the year.
It's that in our interception. I think we've led the country for most of the year. I haven't looked at it as of last weekend, but I know we were number 1 in the country for most of the year. I think every defensive lineman on the front 4 have a pick 6 this year. Wow. Defensive lineman, yeah. So
I don't even think we have a defensive TD, and you got all 4 with a touchdown. That's crazy.
Yeah, one of our guys is leading the country in picks. He has 2 or 3 pick 6s in the secondary. So again, that Georgia Southern game, going back to it, because when the offense was struggling, there was a sense of optimism that had a better chance of scoring when the defense took the field than the offense during that game. So I would say at this point in the season, when the defense takes the field, you do kind of have a little bit of hope that some points can even come out of a defensive possession.
All right. So obviously I hit the high side there with the defense. What is the position group that you're most concerned about?
It has been the quarterback play, but I want to, put an asterisk. I don't mean the quarterback, because I think depending on what game you're looking at, where the quarterback play was not great, there were some questions about, why aren't we running more play action? Why aren't we running more screens? Is the communication breaking down with the receivers? Are they running the right routes? Is the offensive line giving the guy protection? I know one big thing, the way Georgia Southern just really beat us up, was they just blitzed the daylights out of us, and we weren't picking it up. And, there were some armchair quarterbacks that were saying, well, obviously, I've played the video game. When they're blitzing all that, you need to do this, and so I think I asked this question. So we have the luxury on our show of having our former Mickey Matthews, who if you probably saw on social media, we posted a clip of him having some choice words for Old Dominion. But what I asked of him was, I didn't feel like Georgia State did a lot of blitzing, but I felt we were playing some option plays and some play action at a level we hadn't been doing the previous games. And I asked, does that cause Georgia State to have to make some changes that they weren't prepared to do and have to kind of pull back a little bit? So again, there was nothing I was concerned about offensively in the Georgia State game. And what I'm hoping is we use that bye week and everything to kind of get right. But again, as I just described, there are games where I said, all right, we're heading towards a top 25 ranking. And there's games where, we're not going to compete for the East.
All right. So for this Saturday, what is the one facet you want to see the Dukes execute in this game?
I'm criticizing the offense. Let me make one positive thing about the offense is we have not been turning the ball over. I mean, I think I think we were one of 15 teams in the country that had like 2 or less interceptions all year as an entire team. So what I need to see from Jamie, what's going to make me feel confident after the first quarter's over, is that the offense has been able to shut down the pressure that I imagine Old Dominion is going to try to bring to our backfield, to our quarterback, and force him into throws and plays that he doesn't want to make. Because both ULM and Georgia Southern, the 2 games we lost, you knew in the first quarter things were trouble. It wasn't one of those things where it kind of a team clawed back. In the Georgia State game, I think why everyone kind of felt so confident is that first quarter, you didn't see any of that. Even though we weren't running away with the score, we either only put 7 or 14 points up in the first quarter. There wasn't any cause for concern on that front. And so that will be the biggest red flag for me on Saturday.
All right. So I will note this about ULM and going there and how tough it is to win there. Nearest hotel is like 45 minutes away that can accommodate a football team. Their locker room can only accommodate 50 players at a time. So they have to change in shifts, which also means at halftime, you can't meet as an entire team.
Yeah.
They are very good at home for that reason. I feel like that's a big part of their home field success. Because even when they're terrible, they end up with a couple wins at home that don't make any sense.
Well, and I wonder, going back to the CAA days, I'd always wonder why Maine, New Hampshire, Stony Brook, some of these schools where if the facilities were a slight step above of what you'd see around the average Hampton Roads high school, and yet they would continue to have such a great home field record and advantage. And you got to wonder if it was teams just not used to not having all the resources and things. And so I imagine that plays a part. And when I'm trying to drink the purple Kool-Aid and explain that game away, I probably leaned into that theory a little more than I should have. But even again, Coach Matthews going into that ULM game, he was warning everybody, this is not going to be a big atmosphere. There are not going to be a lot of people in the stands. You are not going to have the facilities. This is not just a trap game, but it's a game where you're going to be in an environment you're just not used to playing in.
And they've shown themselves to have a pretty stout defense this year. But notwithstanding, that is a tough place to win. All right. This Saturday, Royal Rivalry. We're tied 2-2 apiece.
Yep.
The second 2 is a big part of why Mickey was so mad on that call and said so many choice words about Old Dominion. But what is your prediction for this one?
I said it in our show last night. Old Dominion, we have Old Dominion, Marshall, and App left, and those are the 3 teams where records just go out the window for me, and especially with Old Dominion. If you do go and look at JMU Sound Off on Twitter or Instagram, you'll see the clip. We clipped some of Mickey's best moments from the show last night, but one of them was previously what he was saying before he was kind of just throwing around some words was, these are 2 Virginia teams. The Hampton Roads area is not only a big recruiting base for JMU, but really any school looking to be competitive in the Mid-Atlantic or Southeast. It's an opportunity to, like you said, we're 2-2, and those 2-2, there's 2-0 in one era of these programs, and there's 2-0 in this new era. Old Dominion beat JMU to FBS, and that was something where, in terms of, I would imagine you're out trying to recruit in-state kids. It's like, look, they might have been around decades before, but we're here. We're already playing at this level, and have proven the success early on. I think it was really big for JMU to get those first 2 wins in the Sun Belt in our transition years. And so, to your point, if I'm a recruit and I'm looking at JMU and Old Dominion, it's kind of 50-50 right now. Are those first 2 years, was it just a fluke because you had Coach Signetti and now he's at Indiana doing his thing, and it really wasn't JMU and more it was Coach Signetti? Or, is JMU the program that's going to continue to be the dominant, G5 program in Virginia? And, so there's a lot riding on this game, and there's so much time. It feels like such a long time between each game every year because so much changes in the college football landscape, whether it be NCAA rules, NIL, transfer portal. So I would say there's a lot on the line just for the future of these two programs this weekend. In addition to, both of us are mathematically still eligible to win the East. Both of us are trying to have a strong record going into bowl season. It's a big game. It's a really big game.
Yeah, it's the biggest we've had since the CAA because this has been our best season in the division to this point. Last year's was big, but we just didn't realize it yet.
Right.
Like, had we beaten you guys, we were going to the Sun Belt title game, and we just didn't know it.
Yep.
Because we had to win all those games at the end of the season, and it wasn't quite at the end of the year yet. So we had no idea that we were even had a shot.
Well, and you're asking me about how do I feel about this game this weekend? Whether it's JMU season, whether it's Old Dominion season, I can't make any rhyme or reason really about any Sun Belt team. I mean, Old Dominion, you go toe to toe with South Carolina, you dominate Texas State, but then there's been those games where, the East Carolina game, I think Old Dominion's probably the better team this year. App State, it's really hard to pinpoint where they are because they've gone through so much with the hurricane. And, I don't know if you know this, but they've moved their homecoming to the JMU game, which in my mind, I'm like, well, that's just great. They're going to be this, everyone's going to want them to win. Everyone's going to be supporting them. And I said, they're going to have this emotion behind the game. So we have a gauntlet these next 3 games. And while I feel pretty good about going at least 2-1 in these next 3 games, 1-2 or 0-3, it's not because I'm doubting JMU. It's the Sun Belt's a good football conference. These are very good football teams, and these are going to be, Old Dominion and Old Dominion App State on the road, Marshall at home that last week of the season. It's not the FCS anymore. We're blowing teams out by 40 points every game.
Yeah, it's all a battle, week in and week out. So we're going to close with this. Are you making the trip? And do you have any questions for the Dukes making the trip to Norfolk?
Yes. So one, yes, I am. My last trip there 2 years ago had the benefit of my brother had a buddy. They had a tailgate spot, parking pass, everything lined up. So I didn't even have to really look into it. I will say, since we did our episode last night and John, our other co-host, kind of deemed me the Old Dominion expert just because I'm from the area, I've probably had a dozen text messages asking about parking, asking about where to go. And I believe there's a couple of parking garages, I think, that have some. So I think one thing you could maybe help the JMU Nation is kind of what is your best advice for parking for out-of-town fans, how early to get there, and, where should they kind of be looking?
All right, so parking's easy. There's free parking next to the TED or Chartway Arena in both garages.
Okay.
The one on 43rd has a lot more spaces.
Okay.
It's a little bit easier to maneuver because the other one is half hotel parking, and it's just a smaller garage. But park there. There are shuttles that run around campus that you can take. But I would park there, walk over to Kaufman Mall. There's a lot going on there. I imagine that the JMU Alumni Association will probably have a tent there. We have one huge, massive open tent with a cash bar, and there's food trucks around, live music. It's a pretty nice setup. Um, Otherwise, you can also walk around the lots. People are pretty welcoming.
Yeah.
So come to the Blue Lot. I will say this is our big Toys for Tots fundraiser that the Monarchists have started.
Okay.
So through our connections, we've been able to set up multiple. There are going to be multiple AAVs on campus with Marines. There's going to be Marines walking through the lots, collecting cash or cash donations. But so if JMU fans watching, either bring an unwrapped new toy for a boy or girl, or be prepared to bring some cash or to donate. We'd love your support in this because we've been doing it. I think this is year 5. We've been doing this, and it's something we take a lot of pride in. And last time we played you guys, we did it, and a lot of Dukes helped make it a successful day. But we're just trying to every year top ourselves on what we're doing.
Well, let's talk offline a little bit, and if there's some promo material or something we can post on our social media channels, we'd be happy to do so.
Awesome. I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
I will give one kudos to y'all's stadium. So 2 years ago when we went there, first of all, what I love about Charlotte Stadium, what I love about y'all's is you can kind of walk the concourse there, and you're still able to kind of see the game. And I will say, Old Dominion really made an impact on our administration because of so many of the grab and go concession areas, and concessions were just moving and flowing so quickly. It was shortly after our trip to Old Dominion 2 years ago that there became stations like that at Bridgeforth Stadium that were not there previously. So you guys, you do things right there. It's a great game day atmosphere, and it's one that I'm excited to get back to.
Well, we're excited for this one. It's a big one. Can't wait for Saturday. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
We really do appreciate it. Hope all the Dukes have a fun time. Enjoy the game and leave upset with a loss.
Same to you. Other way, though.
Thanks, Taylor.
All right. Have a good one.